Asking for money is difficult, especially if you don't come from a community where that's a common thing. You gotta be comfortable talking about money, and you gotta be comfortable talking about yourself. I got this really great advice early on was if you want to get good at pitching, take acting or improv lessons. It gets you comfortable in doing things in front of people. And also when you meet these people, ask them about themselves first. It feels like a conversation. There's no pressure on you.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Fortunes of the Brave. My name is Mary Katherine Johnson. I'm the CXO of Planet Wealth, and I get to chat with someone today. My guest today is Mac Conwell. Mac is the founder and managing partner of Rare Breed Ventures. Can't wait to find out where that name came from. And I get to have a conversation with him. Welcome, Mac. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me today.
Fantastic. Well, let's just start with who you are and what you do. You know, for the people in the audience who may not know exactly who you are and what you do, why don't you give us a quick little introduction?
Okay, well, my name is McKeever Edward Conwell II. Most people call me Mac. If you follow me on Twitter now, X, it's Mac the VC. I'm a guy from Baltimore. Went to a small HBCU where I got an internship with NSA. My junior year, I dropped out of school because Northrop Grumman offered me more money than I thought was possible. Spent the beginning of my career as a government contractor for about 6 years. And in 2009, started my first company with two of my best friends. Didn't know what a startup was, didn't know what a VC was, didn't even know what networking was. We were just three engineers building something. Ran that company for 4.5 years, a pivot, 2 accelerators, and eventually sold the IP to a division of American Express. I had another company that didn't work out. I then ended up at a marketing firm where I left on principle because they had a client I didn't agree with ethically. And at the time, I had no clue what I was going to do next in life. But somehow I got this community-wide email from the investment arm of the state of Maryland saying they were looking for a new fund manager. I applied to that one job and in that job only because I'm a crazy person, had no clue how prestigious or competitive it was. I just knew I could do the job. They then, after 4 months, told me I was not qualified for the job. But then they created a junior position to bring me on staff. I was the first person of color ever on their investment team in their 20-year history. I started on their seed investment team. And at the time, they were struggling to invest in more Black-led startups. And all I kept hearing was bad ideas. So I eventually came to work less than 6 months on the job with a proposal to start a pre-seed fund for those entrepreneurs and got a Black-owned bank in Baltimore to put up half the money. I got in trouble for that, for doing a deal on behalf of the state of Maryland. So they took me to the AG's office, put me on probation and told me go run it while I did my day job as well. Ran that program for about 3.5 years. And then fiscal year 2020, got the governor and state legislators to put $1 million in the annual budget to make it a long-term program in the state. It was the first and only state-backed pre-seed fund for women and minorities in the country. That was awesome. And then in 2020, I left that job to start Rare Breed Ventures, a pre-seed to seed venture firm investing in companies outside the major tech hubs, so outside of Silicon Valley, New York, and Boston, but more broadly, we invest in North America, South America, UK, and Africa. And my big claim to fame is I raised more than 80% of the money off of Twitter, now known as X. So more than 80% of the folks who are investors in my fund came in through a Twitter interaction. In my first 90 days of fundraising, I had 1,128 meetings to soft circle my first 3 million. That is a fun story people love to hear about. And I have 192 LPs and 168 of them put in 50K or less. And because of that, I have gone in front of Congress twice to champion a bill to increase the number of LPs if you're raising 50 million or more, 50 million or less, to up to 500. Reducing the minimum check size and making broader access for folks. So that's my quick version of my bio.
All right. Well, there is a ton to unpack in that thing. First off, I want to back up a little bit to this whole, you got in trouble for, kind of doing what you thought was right. And then they told you to go ahead and keep doing it, but on the side and while you're doing your, so what?
Well, they were trying to figure out ideas to get more Black entrepreneurs to come for our funding. And what they found out was they got funded at the same rate as everybody, but not as many of them was applying. And one of the issues that came up was they lacked access to friends and family capital to even compete for our 100K investment. And so I said, we're an investment firm. Let's come up with like a 40 to 50K investment, act like their friends and family around, give them a chance to build an MVP and see if they could compete. And I had a friend at the time who worked at the Harbor Bank of Maryland, local black-owned bank here. And I said, I got this idea for this pre-seed fund. Do you think I would be interested? A week later, he took me to go meet his boss, and his boss was like, yeah, we could do that. And so they offered to put up half the money. So when I gave them a proposal, they were like, we see this thing with this bank. Is this aspirational? I was like, no, they have already agreed to it. And they're like, well, you can't do deals on behalf of the state of Maryland. But they always talked about public-private partnerships. They never really did anything like that. It was just a lot of lip service. I was like, I put it in front of them so like they couldn't say no. Like, hey, they're putting up 200,000. You just got to match it, and we can give 10 people 40K.
That's crazy. Yeah. So they just didn't have the procedure set out for you to be able, they talk about it, but you got to check this box first and that box first. And then you go talk to this person first and that, right? I mean, they just didn't have that all worked out. And then you just went and did it. And they're like, wait a minute, we got to have a consequence for you because you did not follow a procedure.
Yeah. I'm an ask for forgiveness kind of guy.
Yeah. That's fantastic. All right. Yeah, you're an ask for forgiveness kind of guy, and we use a term around here quite often at Planet Wealth, and it's GSD, and the PG version of that is get stuff done. I usually in private use the different version, but that's what you do. You're just a GSD kind of guy. You just get stuff done.
That's exactly what it is.
Yeah. So tell me more. Okay, I love this so much because we at Planet Wealth work with crowdfunding. We work with Reg CF. We work with the Jobs Act. We work with entrepreneurs, both solopreneurs and enterprise level, anywhere in between. And I have to dive into this because procedures we can help people with. We can help them file a Form ID. We can help them file a Form C. We can help them go through compliance. We can get their offering statement done. All those procedural things, legal and compliant things. But the thing that scares the bejeezers out of people is the marketing. Just like you just said. Where do I find? How do I find investors? Where do I go? I don't know anybody that has any money that can invest. What do I do? So we got to talk about that. The whole Twitter thing. All right. So tell me, please. Start with, did you have a following on Twitter already? And if you did, what was it for?
I did not. I've been on Twitter since like 09, 08, maybe a little earlier. And so this is 2020. I had less than 3,000 followers at the time. And this is post George Floyd. And I had like some thoughts I had to get out of my head. So I wrote some Medium posts and I tweeted. I just made this idea in my head that I was going to tweet every day for 2 weeks. It was very arbitrary. And as I was going through, I usually would like get a lot of feedback on Twitter and engagement because I was an investor, right? And it always became overwhelming because I worked for the state of Maryland. It's like there wasn't anything I could do for these folks. So as I'm going through the process of tweeting every day, I'm meeting these founders and I'm just giving them advice. And then I meet this Latin founder in Dallas, Texas, who had a B2B SaaS company doing 10,000 monthly recurring revenue. And also had like a signed partnership agreement with Accenture, a top consulting firm. And I couldn't understand why this guy couldn't get money. And it was like, oh, it's because he's a Latin guy in Dallas, Texas. And so I started reaching out to some folks I knew to put together a special purpose vehicle to make a one-off investment where I just found him, but I let other people make the investment because I still work for the state. I couldn't really do much. And one of my mentors or advisors came to me. He's like, Mac, I love this company, but I don't want to invest in this company. I want to invest in every company you find. So I want to give you $250K towards your fund. And I was like, because at the beginning of 2020, I wanted to do a fund, but then COVID happened. Nobody's investing. So I'm like, I'll put that on the back burner. And after going back and forth with this mentor for a bit, he convinced me to go do it. And as I did it, I started going to reach out to my personal network. My goal was to get to 10. And I got to 400K and realized I didn't know how to raise a fund. So I recognized that my personal network only got me to 400K. And that's when I realized I didn't have a network of LPs. I didn't know how to raise a fund, any of that. And so I was trying to figure out like what I was missing here. But a weird thing happened as I was tweeting. and all I was tweeting at the time was like advice to founders, just like tidbits to founders. Like every time you have a meeting with a founder as a VC, you always leave with a thought like, I love it when founders do this. I hate it when founders do that. And I was just tweeting those thoughts up. And I noticed that other VCs started to follow me. So I would check my following count after every tweet. And if you were a VC, I would just follow you, no matter who you were. And I would send you a DM telling you a little bit about myself and a link to my calendar. And so very quickly, my calendar started to fill up. And I was just meeting these folks just to learn. Like I needed to learn. And so one of the things, though, was under the first Trump administration, they had changed the rule where if you're raising 10 million or less, instead of only being able to have 100 LPs, you could have 250 LPs. So I knew I was raising 10 million. So I knew I had 250 LPs that I could go. So it allowed me to have a really low minimum for people to come in. My first minimum was 10K. And so as I'm meeting folks, I'm telling them my plan and my strategy. And like my first 2 or 3 weeks of doing this, I meet Elizabeth Yen from Hustle Fund. And I'm telling her what I'm doing, and I tell her what my minimum is. And she says, oh, I think I could do that. Can I be in? And I was like, I was struck by it. I was like, can you do that? And she's like, yeah, like I could do it personally, not from the fund, but I'd like to put 10K in. I was like, awesome. And so that just became my strategy. I just kept meeting as many other investors as I could. And I was never asking for money deliberately. I was just asking to learn. And, if they were interested, it would come out. And my following started to grow very rapidly. I went from like 3,000 followers to 50,000 followers in like 8 months. Right? And so my name started to like really travel in the industry. I was getting really popular to almost a really weird extent. And like it just snowballed. And next thing I knew, I was oversubscribed by like 30 million. Like people run to be in towards the end. So that was a really cool experience. And it was like I just did the things that I knew as a founder, right? I was never a founder that had money. And so I always tell people you either have time or money. Whichever one you have is what you use. So my time was being creative. I mean, even when I was doing my first close, so I set up my fund to work very differently. I said to work up like a rolling fund, but as a traditional fund, some technical stuff we can get into if you want. But I set it up so that people could close whenever they signed the docs, but nobody was signing. So I gave people a drop dead date, and it was like December 28th of 2020. And what I did for the month of December, every Tuesday and Thursday, I sent out an email with a story about a company I wanted to invest in. It wasn't like a breakdown of the company. It was a breakdown like how I met them, what was interesting about them, what I thought about the founder. Like for one of them, it was a woman creating plant-based hair extensions, right? Braiding hair made out of banana leaf fibers. And so I knew a lot of people wouldn't understand it. So I took screenshots from women on Twitter commenting about how big of a deal this was for them. And anyway, every Tuesday and Thursday when I would do this, after every company came out, I would always get a group of folks being like, yes, I love this idea. I love this company. I'm in. And I just used that as a marketing tool, email marketing to get people to close.
Yeah. So, okay, a couple of things. Again, I got to go back to, first off, oh, you poor thing. You could only raise 400,000 with your own network. I'm just so sad for you. What? I mean, come on. Most people are like 400,000. They're like, yeah, that's an amazing network. But obviously you needed more, you wanted more, you knew you could find more, and you kept going. And a couple of things that you said are so crucial and that I talk to people all the time about. And that is just talk about it. No, you're not asking people for money. You're not trying to sell people. You are talking about, you are asking questions. You are asking for advice. You are sharing your mission. You're sharing your why, about why you're doing this, why you are different. If you're just doing this to make money, you're already in the pool where all the sharks are and the water's bloody. Nobody's going to see you. Nobody's going to know you. You have to have something that is unique about you and why you're doing as an entrepreneur, as a solopreneur, enterprise, whatever. There must be a purpose beyond just, I opened my door so I can make money. I don't know any entrepreneur that only did that. I don't know any. I'm sure they're there. I'm sure they've made lots of money. But the people you're talking about are not people that opened their door, the hair extensions did not open their door just to make money off of hair extensions. There's a purpose much deeper than just making money with hair extensions. That's it. You talk about that. And when you talk to people, hey, this is what I'm working on. This is why I want to do this. Any advice you have for me? Any feedback? When I talk about this, what does it make you think about? All kinds of questions like, but you just have to. So I think this is where I need to go next, because not everybody's like you, where they're comfortable doing what you've done in terms of, going against the state of Maryland and talking to the AG and, going on Twitter talking about, and having 400,000 in your own network, right? Not everybody is comfortable doing that. So I know it's part of who you are, but what advice would you give people to really shift their mindset so that they cannot look at this like I'm asking for money, but look at it like I'm sharing my message, that's my idea. What would you say they're doing instead of just asking for money? And how can they shift that mindset to be able to do that effectively?
Well, I'll answer that, and there's two more things I forgot to mention when I was talking about my story. So asking for money is difficult, especially if you don't come from a community where that's a common thing, right? Because I will tell you, many entrepreneurs come from communities where asking for help and asking for money is a thing, right? It's just what they do, right? Where when they go to the dinner table, they talk about money. Like, I ain't come from a family like that. So what I tell people is, you got to get comfortable with that. You got to be comfortable talking about money, and you got to be comfortable talking about yourself. And I know it's hard, right? Not everybody's okay talking about themselves, but it can be a practice behavior, right? I tell founders sometimes who want to get good at pitching, I got this really great advice early on was, if you want to get good at pitching, take acting or improv lessons. Because it just gets you into the root of storytelling and gets you comfortable in doing things in front of people, right? Like if you do improv, they will ask you to do some weird things, like pretend that you're a tree in front of a group of strangers, right? But if you do that once a week for 8-9 weeks, at some point you get more comfortable with it. You feel more comfortable in front of a group of people. You feel more comfortable doing things that you used to be really uncomfortable doing. And also, never forget, you know yourself better than anybody, right? Nobody's going to be able to tell your story better than you. And when you're looking for money, don't just be transactional, right? What you're doing is telling a story. Storytelling is really important. And also, when you meet these people, ask them about themselves first. Stroke their ego, ask them about their story. Be personable, right? Because at the end of the day, we're all people. No matter if it's a homeless man on the street or a billionaire, they're just people. They like to do a lot of the same things. They tell a lot of the same kind of jokes. They watch the same TV shows and movies you do. For me, I love sports. So it's real easy for me to get in front of a guy and start talking about his favorite team and going back and forth, right? Because it brings the wall down where they don't feel like it's transactional. It feels like a conversation. There's no pressure on anybody. That's the best place to be, because at that point, they're more open up. They're more willing to hear you out. And it's less like the same thing they do all day, every day. Because I promise you, most people get in front of them, treat it as very transactional. Time is money. I got to do all this. It's okay to take a little bit of time, right? And I should mention two things. One, I never raised my fund with a pitch deck. I never used a pitch deck. I spoke in terms of a story. It was a 3-part story. The first part was a story about myself. The second part was like the mundane. This is how much we're raising. This is our thesis, the basic stuff. And then the third part was a story about my North Star, right? The reason why I started my fund. And if you didn't resonate with that, I knew we wouldn't be able to work together, because my North Star is very unique. When I was working for the state of Maryland, I met this black woman, this amazing entrepreneur by the name of Shauna Smith Jones. And she came to me and she had this brilliant idea where she wanted to create a dryer that could drive a wig or hair weave in 15 minutes with no heat. Very unique idea. And as an investor, that's not something I hear. As I rarely hear a unique idea. Like most ideas, I hear some kind of version of. I heard some kind of version of it, like time and time again. But this was truly unique. And she couldn't get funding from the program I created for people like her. And it was frustrating. I had teammates who didn't understand where she was coming from. Mind you, she had an engineering degree from Morgan, a master's from Johns Hopkins, and at the time was a patent examiner. She's an engineer. If you're going to pick anybody to try and build this, and it came from her own life experience. She said she was getting the weed put in, and she had to drop it off the day before so they could wash and color it so it could dry overnight so she could put it in the next day. She's like, why am I driving 45 minutes to and back twice to get this done? There's got to be a solution, right? So she buys a small dryer off of Amazon, reconfigures it to prove out the concept could work. And nobody can help this woman for 3 years. So I'll never forget, I'm in Cincinnati doing this founder boot camp for another program. And she calls me, she's all excited. And she's telling me how she figured out a way to pay for her prototype. She became a surrogate mother to raise $40,000 to start the process of building a prototype. She literally put her life on the line and gave birth to twins for 40 grand, which isn't even enough to build a full prototype. And I was heartbroken. Like she was excited, but I was heartbroken. That's how far she needed to go because nobody else could give her the time of day. Filmers like that deserve a chance. Like whether they make it or not, they deserve a chance. And so I literally raised a $10 million fund so I could give her and this Latin guy $500,000. Well, he got 250, she got $500,000. Like that's what got me started. And so when I told that story in my pitch, if you didn't get emotional or you didn't feel that story, if you were just stonewalled as you looked at me, I knew we probably weren't going to be able to work well together.
That's a perfect example of what I mean by your why. And you call it your North Star. As Planet Wealth, that makes sense, right? I mean, we're another planet. So yeah, you can put a star out there and, go by that North Star. But that ability for you to hear a story like that and be moved by it and see that it's a unique idea, that had to come. Those two things you just talked about, the whole mindset of talking about money, talking about yourself, feeling comfortable sharing these ideas and these stories, and now this North Star, those had to be strengthened by those, what was it, 1,128, I think you said, conversations that you had.
Yes.
So just like you said, improv, the more you do something like that, the more you, as long as you're open, and I think that's the number one thing. We are always worried because we talk about ourselves rather than let others talk about themselves, because that's what we think we're supposed to do. I'm supposed to tell you all about my business and all about me and all about this thing, and I've got to tell. Well, that's not being open to what this other person's going to say. So I can imagine that those 1,100 plus conversations gave you a fast track education on how to communicate in relation to raising capital. What about that? And whatever else helped, it's not just that, obviously. Can you impart to others that are trying to do the same thing?
Well, I had a bit of an edge on that point because as a founder, when I started out, me and my co-founders were all engineers. I ended up being the one they made CEO because I didn't mind going to events and doing this thing called networking. And very quickly in your entrepreneurship journey, you recognize the idea of being a stealth company or being cagey with what you're doing doesn't help. So you have to get comfortable with telling people about what you're doing. And you do that time and time again. And then being a good storyteller, I was also a person on the team who pitched. So I had practice pitching, right? And for me, it started off, I was having these conversations with these other investors. And after about 2 or 3 weeks, I realized I had created a pitch. And so I was just doubling down on that and figuring out what parts resonated, what parts I had to emphasize, what parts about my journey I need to emphasize, what parts about my North Star, and what parts about the fun that resonated with people. So I was able to perfect that over time. But that was something I've done before, right? It wasn't foreign to me. But I will tell you, getting started in Baltimore as like one of two Black founders at the time in 2010, going to networking events and going in the rooms with nothing but older white men drinking nasty beer, these IPAs, and having to be able to like find a connection point with them was really hard until I realized, oh, we're all entrepreneurs. There is a common ground here. Everybody wants to talk about their business. Everybody wants to talk about the business that made them their money. Everybody wants to give you whatever advice they have, good or not. And so I found that, okay, I can be comfortable in these rooms because we're all human and we all have these connection points. But that was hard for me in the beginning.
Yeah.
That was scary for me. And then I had some really amazing gentlemen, older white gentlemen, who really took me under their wing and really helped me out in ways I could never repay. Right. And the weird thing for me at the time, and one thing I noticed, is probably a lot to do with how I am today, was I got the most help and information, not from conferences I paid to, but from networking with people who were giving me information for free. And because of that, I never liked making people pay for information, because like the people who helped me the most were just gracious with their time and just, they gave me so much information, so much game that I could never repay. And even, in terms of money, later in my career, I got the privilege to become a Kauffman Fellow, right? A very prestigious organization. Well, when I went through my first accelerator in 2012, my second accelerator in 2012, there was a guy by the name of Marlon Nichols, who worked at Intel Capital at the time, who now runs a large venture firm called Mac Ventures. And he was on the board at Kauffman. When I got waitlisted, I look up and I end up getting the scholarship, which covers half the price. I don't know how that happened till later, but there was somebody inside who I'd known for almost a decade who championed me. And then I didn't have the money to pay for it. And so another amazing gentleman who was a mentor of mine, a guy by the name of Vince Talbert, who was the co-founder of Bill Me Later, got sold to PayPal for over $1 billion, right? I reached out to him, told him about my situation. He's like, I got you. And those two gentlemen who had helped me from when I was an entrepreneur got me started on my track as an investor. When I was an entrepreneur, neither one of them could really help me much. But I fostered that relationship over time. I kept those relationships going. And those led to very significant, turning points in my career as an investor. Kauffman's one of the greatest things that happened to me, but it's like, I always thought it was it's like the Harvard of venture capital. It's so prestigious. I don't even have a college degree. In most rooms I go into, I'm in almost every room I'm in these days, I'm the only person who doesn't have a college degree. I'm surrounded by people who mostly have masters, right? Who have MBAs from Harvard and Stanford. And I had all this imposter syndrome, but folks like that put me in positions to let me know that it was okay. And that it was okay to be a storyteller. It was okay to be myself. Because at the end of the day, everybody recognized that I had the intelligence for it. Didn't matter how I looked. Didn't matter that I was black or I had dreadlocks. Like, when I opened my mouth and we talked business, they saw me and they understood me. And that's what mattered the most, not what I looked like. And those gentlemen were two of the most important in my journey.
That is so amazing. What I hear you saying is, or at least the way I interpret that, is that the people who are going to judge you by any of those characteristics, immutable or not, whether it's the degree that you have or don't have, or the way you look, the people that actually do judge on those characteristics are not going to be the people you want to work with anyway. And there are obviously enough people in the world, in this world specifically, who don't judge by those people, or those characteristics, excuse me. And they do want to help people come up like they did or make it a little easier for them than they had. There are enough people out there that to go around if you build those relationships. So that kind of gets me to the next thing, which is, okay, you asked for advice, you talked to these people, they gave you advice. Now let's talk about the actions you had to take and how you had to take that advice and turn it into actual actions and create traction that then built momentum. Because I think that's like a GSD, just like you talked about. You're going to take that information, you're going to act on it. You're not going to think and I don't know, and maybe tomorrow, and I got to go do this other thing first, and then I'll think about that. No. You just go do. So how did you turn that into traction and then momentum?
Well, I should start off because, we're talking about the Jobs Act a bit here. The reason why I was able to actually raise money on Twitter, which is public soliciting, right? That's a big no-no. Well, that's under a regulation called 506B. Within the Jobs Act, they added in a regulation called 506C, which allows you to publicly solicit, but all of your investors must be accredited. If you go with 506B, you can't publicly solicit, but you can have up to 20 non-accredited investors. Well, I already knew that all my investors were going to be accredited anyway. And so 506C was a perfect way for me to go. And you'll have lawyers want to charge you more for it. It's just a different regulation. There's nothing special about it. There's no unique paperwork. You can just choose like, hey, I'm a public solicit, but all the people who invest must be accredited investors. So that's why I was able to very openly talk about my fund on Twitter. And the way I built momentum was, again, I was meeting these folks, but most of my tweets early on were just advice points to founders. Like I wasn't looking for anything. Most of it was advice. Every now and then I would tell you a little bit about myself, right? A little bit about, the car I drove in college or a picture of my dog, right? Those are the kind of things that make you feel like a human. And then every now and then I would share a vulnerability, right? Like I had a bad meeting. I messed up a pitch. I stumbled on this word. I sent the email with the wrong name. Stuff that everybody can relate to. But when they see you on Twitter doing good things, you kind of stop being a regular person. That humanizes you. And that gives people a feeling. And I learned people come for the information, but they stay for the feeling. Right? That was one thing that my wife taught me. My amazing wife, Denise Conwell, I hope she's listening to this, was I grew up with some learning disabilities. I'm dyslexic, and I'm a slow reader. So I hate writing, right? But my wife would always tell me, you're a good writer. You have information to share. You should share it. And so I started writing these Medium posts where I know there were misspellings. And I know my grammar wasn't perfect, but people were still resonating with it. And it's because the information was there and it left them with a feeling. And as long as you get the feeling across, people will pay attention. And so I just kind of doubled down on that and I made it and I was consistent. I was tweeting daily, every day, these little tidbits. And then as I was learning on my journey about raising my fund, I started tweeting out stuff about what it meant to be a first-time GP, what it's like to be an emerging manager, talking about different rules, talking about how I was breaking the rules, telling people like, hey, here's the playbook everybody gives you for raising a VC fund. This is the way you're supposed to move your money. That's not the only way to do it. Just because that's what they're teaching you in classes, or that's what all the books say, that's why every VC you've ever met has told you, that doesn't mean that has to be the way it is. Like, I broke so many rules while raising my fund. I used to have LPs send me DMs telling me what I was telling them was wrong, or that's not the way you do it. I was like, that's not the way most other people do it. That doesn't mean that's not how I can do it. And they're like, you just don't know what you're talking about. I know what I'm talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I know this stuff inside and out. I understand most people's LPAs aren't written this way, but mine is, right? Most people have an LPAC. I don't. Because I needed to be able to do whatever I was going to do. Because I knew I was going to invest in stuff that people were going to question. I mean, I got some wild kind of investments in my portfolio. I got a few that some LPs had to question. And then when I broke it down to them, they were like, oh, how'd you find this amazing company? I'm like, because I need you to trust me. I know this is unorthodox, but just give me this lane. Just like I'm a generalist on purpose. Most people hear that I'm a generalist, and what they typically think is, oh, that means you're young or immature in this industry. You need to learn how to be a specialist. Like, no, I'm a generalist on purpose. My skill set comes from my experience. My first job was finding all the best entrepreneurs in the state of Maryland. And then it was to buy all the best minority entrepreneurs in the state of Maryland. You have to be really creative to do well doing that, right? And so that's what allowed me to have a thought process that allows me to evaluate any company. I don't follow trends. Like Web3 was the big thing. So yes, we invested in a few Web3 companies, but I wasn't like doubling down on that. That's just the trend of the day. My best performing companies, none of them are Web3. None of them were companies that people were excited about when I made the investments, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And you talked about, 506B, 506C. That's one of the reasons we're helping entrepreneurs start here at Planet Wealth with Reg CF, because you can publicly solicit, you can talk about it, and it's non-accredited or accredited. Now, there is a cap, right? It's only up to $5 million in a 12-month period. But most new entrepreneurs, some of the ones that you talked about, 500,000 is what they're looking for. And they can use their community to back themselves. So tell me about that. You started out looking in Twitter and your own network. Again, poor thing, 400,000. I just can't get over that. How you were able to actually even make a business out of that. Yeah. Anyway, I'll stop being facetious now. But no. So looking at that and looking at Twitter, and then talk about a little bit about community before I go into maybe some of the lessons that you learned. How did Twitter? How did these 1,100 conversations? How did everything that you were building in your fund, which is of course different from what we're talking about with Reg CF. Reg CF is not a fund. You can't do a fund with Reg CF. But how did you tap into community to help with that?
it was interesting as my popularity grew on Twitter. I had different people from like every walk of life that was following me. And I would very often use my community. I'd be like, hey, community, I have a founder that needs this, or I need help with that. And so the best way I can describe the power of that, of my community, just give you a sense of like what my community was like. So my baby cousin, Jordan, happens to be the lead guitarist for Lizzo. She became her guitarist at like 19, right? It's weird. It's interesting. Like, that's my baby cousin. Right? And she's going on tour with Lizzo. So they're having her like go away party. It's a big deal. And I'm like, cuz, what would you like? What do you need? Do you need clothes? You need some instruments? You're about to be traveling. Make sure you stay safe. And she's like, can you get me a deal with Fender, the guitar company? She's like, yeah. I'm like, who do you think I am? Aren't you famous? Not that kind of famous. So I go to Twitter and it's like, hey, community, my cousin's going to be the new lead guitarist for Lizzo, super artist. And she would like to get introduced to the folks at Fender. Does anybody have a connection? So another investor I know in a Midwestern state says, hey, I come from the music background, know some folks there. So he introduces me to the head of marketing at Fender, who gets me to their head of partnerships. And within a week, my cousin has a meeting with Fender to do a deal. And like, that all came from my community because all I was doing was helping people on Twitter. So when I asked for help, they were always there. Same thing on LinkedIn to this day, right? When you're helping people, people are always excited to help you back.
Wow. All right. Everybody, please. If that's not a fortune of the brave, I don't know what is. Just be brave to give first. And believe me, people will reciprocate. The right people will. The people who really don't want and they just want to take, you'll see them very clearly. Very clearly. They will rise to that distinction. All right, so now let's kind of wrap this up with some potential failures, right? I mean, I know, like you said, you mentioned another company that you didn't work out, right? We kind of gloss over those things. I get it, but what would you say? Well, how did failing as a founder teach you about success in a way that having all this amazing access to capital never could?
So two things. One, as a founder, you get really comfortable with risk and you recognize one of the first things you recognize, which is hard to, is when you fail, the people who truly love you and care about you never cared about how amazing or great your company was, right? They loved you for who you are. They don't think you're any less talented or smart or strong just because you had a failure, right? My friends would be like, oh, that sucks. You'll do something else. Come on, let's go get a drink, right? Let's go to Buffalo Wild Wings. Like, that's what we always do. Nothing's changed, right? And so that's one of the first things. The second thing is when you fail and you get back up, you recognize there's always another side. So I would think to myself, hey, I'm doing this company. I'm almost flat broke. What's the worst that could happen? I could lose all my money, be in debt, still be pretty young with an amazing skill set that's very wanted. And that's not too bad. That means I can find a way to stand up again, right? That's one thing failure taught me. The other thing was taking care of myself. I've had 2 mental breakdowns in my journey, right? Because the hustle and the grind gets to you, the overworking and burnout. You don't need to live like that. Because as an entrepreneur, it's really, really easy to forget about yourself and the things you used to do because you got to get ready for this meeting or you're waiting for this email. Like, I had a panic attack one time because I was on a date and we went to the movies and I was freaking out because I couldn't check my email. And like, that was a wake up call for me. And granted, I let it happen to me again later in life, right? Like, I knew better, but when you're on the grind or you have this journey, you also put extra expectations on yourself, extra stress on yourself. Like, I'm doing this for my community. I'm doing it to prove myself, to prove my family, to prove my coworkers, the people I went to school with, my teammates. They're counting on me. It just builds all this stress. And that can lead to really adverse effects. And so when I talk to entrepreneurs, I speak on that. Like whenever I meet with entrepreneurs for office hours, I always start with asking them how they're doing and what's their stress level from 1 to 10. And I make them tell me what they do to de-stress. So every time we meet up, I'm going to ask them, have they been doing that? Like, I hold them accountable. And like, my experience was bad, but the real reason it hits home is when I got started. When I left the government to start my entrepreneurship journey, it was because one of our friends had left before us and gone to Silicon Valley because some guys from Google gave him some money to build a company. He didn't even know what that was. But when I started my journey, me and one of my best friends, this guy by the name of Devin Partlow, decided to go out at the same time. So we were 2 black guys, both with dreads in Baltimore, raising these companies. And everybody thought we worked together. And when they found out we didn't, it was even more amazing, right? Well, one thing we didn't know was Devin had a bad liver. And he didn't tell anybody. And he was dealing with this for years. I didn't find out until he was like 5 minutes away from going into surgery to get a liver transplant. He calls me, completely drugged up. He gives the phone to his mom. I've never met her. And she's like, Devin told me to call you just so somebody would know if anything bad happened. And I'm like pulled over into like a CVS parking lot, freaking out. Well, he was able to get through that, got the transplant, was in the hospital for 5 months. He got out. And when he got out, the first thing he wanted to do was get a new job because he didn't have a job. And while he was in the hospital, he thought about a new startup idea. Right? At this point, we've gone through 5, 6, 7 ideas now. He's got a new one. And some guys he used to work with, he wanted to start working with again. And so he was getting back to the ground. He had a young lady he was looking at marrying soon. He wanted to get his money together. And he was tired of being in the hospital. And he's so busy focusing on the work and getting back to the grind and doing all this proving to people that he wasn't taking care of himself. And so on May 10th, 14 days before my birthday, he came to my house for a cookout that he made me do. He called me that morning. It was like a Saturday morning. He's like, I'm like, he's like, what you doing? I'm like, I'm thinking about having a cook. I'm thinking about grilling. He's like, yeah, you should do that. We'll invite some people. He came over. We had a great time. And his eyes were yellow. And I was asking him about, he's like, oh, for the surgery, this, that, the third. Should have known better. That night, he went home and passed out on his floor and never woke up again. So he was too busy chasing the dream of an entrepreneur. Because he let the dream and the entrepreneurship be bigger than himself. And that was one of the biggest failures I've ever felt. And even now, as I'm almost 40 now, I still have to constantly remind myself not to lose myself because even as a venture capitalist now, I'm still an entrepreneur. I got to run my firm, right? And I'm a solo, so I got to do all this stuff by myself. So it's easy to get lost in the work, but you constantly have to be taking care of yourself. Whatever you need to do for yourself to de-stress. And I always tell people it's always great to have a therapist. Even if you don't think you need one, just to get a checkup. It's like we go to the dentist, like you probably don't need to get your teeth checked, but you just do it. It's a regular thing. Do the same thing with the therapist. Just once a quarter, go for a check-in, make sure everything's okay. So yeah, those kind of failures, you never forget those things.
No, you don't. And what a lesson to learn. Because, I used to drive an ambulance. I used to be a volunteer firefighter, a volunteer ambulance driver in a very small little town. And I've seen some people die. And entrepreneurship is not life or death. It isn't. It might feel like it. It might feel like you're letting everybody down and it feels like you're dying, but you're not. The sun will always rise tomorrow. There's always another deal, another idea, another possibility, another opportunity, another lesson tomorrow if you're there. So thank you for sharing that, Mac. I can only imagine how that was to go through. But I can guarantee you that everyone listening to our voice had a bit of a wake-up call with that story. And yes, I will say you're a good storyteller. That's for sure, because you had me on my seat. I'm like, oh no. So I very much appreciate that lesson. I very much appreciate that story. And I so appreciate you joining me on this podcast today. Is there any final piece of advice that you would like to give these amazing people who are looking to grow their businesses, to raise capital, to make it through this whole entrepreneurial life?
You are enough. You are more than enough. You are capable. Do not second guess yourself. Because at the end of the day, your execution will speak for itself. If you put in the work, you put in the time, and you execute, that will always, always, always speak for itself.
Amen. Thank you so much, Mac, for joining me today. I so appreciate it. I have a feeling this may not be the last conversation we have. At least if I have anything to say about it, it won't be. But I hope you have a fan-stinking-tastic day.
You too. It was my pleasure.
Did this episode help you tackle a mindset shift? Leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. Your feedback can provide actionable solutions to others seeking access to opportunity.